Hello, everyone. Today we have the privilege of a special conversation with one of the world's leading authors in literature. It is a conversation about her extraordinary book, this one, Trei, surori, Three Sisters, published by Humanitas Fiction, Raftul de Nisei. Heather Morris, thank you very much for this huge joy.
Look, my pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you. You imagined and wrote the story of the Three Sisters, also the story of Auschwitz, also the story of Cilkăi. What kind of stories are these? Actually, despite the terrible dramas, why are these stories about hope?
Because they're based on real people who I spent time with the exception of Cilkăi. I was with Lali in his life for 3 years. Up until 2 hours before he died, I was with him. He shared me this incredible story. And in telling his story, and in telling Cilkăi's, and now the Three Sisters, I think I've told the story, well, I'm told by other survivors. I've also told their story. And I've brought it down to just the one person representing the millions.
How can you find hope? How can you build hope and keeping hope in the middle of the hell? The Gulag and the Nazi camp, both are marks of hell.
Yeah. Look, clearly it wasn't easy, but they had something to hang on to. Lali needed to hold on to the hope that he could have a life with Gita, the girl whose arm he held as he stabbed numbers into it. The girl who was dressed in rags and her head shaven. And he knew, and he's telling me nearly 70 years later that he knew in that second he could never love another. So of course he had hope. He had a hope of a life with her. Cilkăi was different. Cilkăi, because I've managed to speak with friends and neighbors of hers, she hung on to hope because she needed to get back to Slovakia to see if any of her family had survived. None had. Now the Three Sisters, they had been separated after they had made a promise to their father that they would never be separated. And now they were. So of course, the two that were in Auschwitz-Birkenau from April 42 until October 1944, all they could do was hope that they could live long enough to get out of there and find their sister. Whereas Magda, she is back in Slovakia for 2.5 years, not knowing where her sisters are, but knowing she's got to find them. And so I guess it's with everything in life, isn't it? There's always something that you can hope for, even in the darkest times. And can I use something more contemporary too, Cristian? For 20 years, I worked in a hospital here in Australia. It was a big acute hospital. And I worked in the social work department. Every day for 20 years, I know I heard that word hope said time and time again. I hope my father can hold on long enough to walk me down the aisle because I'm getting married in 3 months. I hope my mother lives long enough to see her first great-grandchild. I hope my brother can live. And it was all based around something tragic or traumatic happening to them, but they needed hope and they found it.
Do you feel that justice can be done through literature?
Oh, I don't know about justice. Not for these people. There is no justice for them. I have met many, many Holocaust survivors, and for some, like Lali, and also like the Three Sisters, they were able to live good lives. They were able to not forget, never forget, but they were able to live a good life and raise families and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I mean, Lali would say he had a good life. But sadly, I met many other Holocausters survivors who did not have a good life. They never got over it and were able to be happy.
Lale, Cilkăi, Livi, Cibi, Magda, do they have a different way of life through literature? Is their life extended in this way, actually?
Oh, absolutely. The London author, Lord Geoffrey Archer, he got his hands on a copy of my book. We never sent it to him, but he read it and he wrote back to my publishers. And in it, he said the sentence, "This book will still be read in 100 years' time." So the lessons and the story of Lali and now the girls is something which it's never going to fade. Because we keep repeating these terrible atrocities.
The meeting with Livy is the one that determined your desire to write a novel of these three sisters, isn't it? What really happened, actually?
How did I get to meet Livy? Look, it's a lovely story. I love that I have stories behind my stories. I was actually in South Africa on a book tour, and I got an email one day, and it was from a man who lives in Canada. And he wrote telling me that he'd picked up a copy of the Tattooist of Auschwitz at Toronto Airport as he was flying to Tel Aviv to see his mom. He had been reading it on the plane. He left it the next day on his mother's coffee table. And she walked past and looked down at the cover. Now, Canada has the same cover as we have in Australia, which is just a black background, two arms from the elbow down, and the numbers of Lali and Gita very clearly. Where he wrote telling me that his mother looked at the cover of the book and said to him, "That must be about Lali and Gita." Mm-hmm. And when he said to her, "How could you know that?" And she said, "Look at the number on the arm of the girl. Now look at the number on my arm. They're only 3 apart. That's Gita. I went to school with Gita. Your Aunt Sibby and I were on the train going to Auschwitz with Gita, and we were in block 21 with Gita." So I got that email and I responded immediately. And about 4 days later, instead of flying home to Australia, I flew from Johannesburg straight to Tel Aviv, straight to Livy and Magda and their families and Sibby's family. I had never met Sibby.
Is that fact that you choose to write about such topics, such as the story of the tattoo of the Cilkăi of three sisters, a struggle with time? Is a struggle with time, with forgetfulness, a struggle for memory?
Well, yes, of course, memory and history. It is lovely when those two things walk side by side and they do part, and you cannot find something to verify what you've been told. But here's the thing. I'm not telling the story of the Holocaust. I'm just telling a Holocaust story. I'm telling Lali's story. I'm telling the sister's story. And so I honor their memory, because their memory, it's always going to be different from everybody else's. And that was one of the challenges writing the sister's story. Livy and Sibby, 15 and 19, when they were taken to Auschwitz. Now, they have written in memoirs, they have got videotapes that they did for Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation, made 25, 30 years ago. And they would be talking about, I've watched them and read transcripts of them, and I would have the two of them describing the same event or the same horrific incident, and they described it differently. So I'd have to ask Livy, you said this is what was going on. Sibby says this was what was going on. They're different. How are they different? And she always pretty much said, believe Sibby, go with what Sibby wrote and what Sibby said. And I pondered that for quite some time. How could these two women, or young girls, they were just girls, how could they be standing looking at the same thing and now remembering it differently? And I determined that the only thing different between them was maturity and education. What a 15-year-old girl whose education had been ended at age 13, her perception of things versus the 19-year-old who had been educated until 17 was always going to be different.
Who did the three sisters defeat by their surviving?
Hitler.
Okay.
Hitler lost big time. And they talk about that. They talk about how I'm here, he's not. I was in Israel just last month in April. I was with Livy and with Magda. And sadly, last week, Magda died. At the age of 98, we have lost the second of the sisters. And I'm feeling very, very upset about that, but I accept that she was 98 and that I did get to spend this precious time with her only a few weeks ago. But that was something that they would often say. And I think it may be written in the back of the book, a little story from, I think it's from Livy's son. Sibi and Livy and their adult children went back to Auschwitz. Now, when they were leaving Auschwitz and they were going somewhere, they were going, I think, probably further into Poland. And Livy was tired. She was with her husband, also as a Holocaust survivor, and her daughter and son. And just between Auschwitz and Krakow, they saw a hotel. It was a big sort of mansion-y looking house, which is a hotel. And her son and daughter went into that place and said to them, do you have any rooms? You know, my mother and father are really tired and we don't want to go on tonight. And the guy said, yeah, we have spare rooms. And they explained, and he said to them, oh, have you been to Auschwitz? And they said, yes, my parents had been here. And the guy that owned the hotel said, you may not want to stay here then, because this is the place where the senior SS from Auschwitz used to come for their weekends, holidays, and their time away when they weren't working. The SS from 1941 to the very end had been regular stayers in this hotel. And so they said to them, it's okay, we'll go and find somewhere else. They got back in the car, and when they told Livy and her husband, their dad, we can't stay here. This is where the SS stayed. Well, Livy just opened the door, stepped out of the car and said, I'm here, they're not, we're staying here.
This story, an extraordinary story, is very moving. What kind of special power did these three sisters have to survive one of the darkest experiences in human history? And where did this force come from?
Look, they tell me, and they're telling me now, 77 years later, it came from that afternoon they sat in the garden with their father and promised him that they would never be separated, that they would look after each other. And all they kept saying to themselves, and right up until Magda died last week, that was something that you would hear the sisters, the two surviving sisters, saying all the time. We remember our promise to Papa. And that promise not only kept them going through the Holocaust, but when they got back to Slovakia and they were once again treated as second-class citizens and shunned in their own country, two of them left early to come to Israel, and the other one followed as soon as she could. They lived their entire lives only a matter of kilometers apart. They each had two children. Sibi had two boys, Magda two girls, Livy a boy and a girl. Now those six cousins consider the other aunties just another mother. They are so close as siblings. And that's where their victory is. That's where their legacy is. It's in surviving and having these generations continue.
Mm-hmm. Are the three amazing stories your novel tell about God also? There are some extreme challenges to the religious idea, actually. It's a big provocation.
Yeah, look, that's an interesting one. And I don't want to talk too much about what happened with regard to them and their faith. I am prepared to say that Lali never got his faith back. His wife, Gita did. Gita did. She survived, they married, and after 20 years, they were blessed with a child. And she maintained her faith. Lali said he agreed to be a good Jewish husband and a good Jewish father. Now, the three girls, they didn't get these back. And that's the reality. I know that Sibby's husband did. And Sibby went along, of course, with him, but for the others. And no, they wanted to be seen as Jewish Slovakians. Like Lali would say to me, I was a Slovakian. What did it matter if I was a Jewish or a Christian or something else? I was a Slovakian, and look how they treated me.
To you, I'm convinced, come many stories like those already so well known in the novels already published. Do you feel that these stories are looking for you, and how do you choose what to write?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I have been so lucky and privileged to have many people from around the world contact me when they can directly or through my publishers, and sharing these incredible stories they have that are all worthy of being told. You can see that I'm not getting any younger, and I only have a limited number of years in which I can write all these stories. Some of them have been taken on by my publishers for other people will help with the writing. For me, it just seems to be that something about a story immediately grabs me, just like the sisters did. I hadn't planned on writing another Holocaust story. I was going to move away from it. But once you sit down with these families and hear them, they didn't get me. They didn't ask me to come to Israel to tell their story. They just wanted to meet me. That was all it was about. It was only when I was there and listening to them. And I said to them, look, you should find somebody to write their sister's story. And they sent me away for the day. They made me go to Jerusalem one day. And when I got back, all the families had got together. And when I got back the next day, they said, yes, we want the story to be told, and will you do it? But yeah, I'm so privileged to be offered so many different stories now. Of course, they're going to be always revolve around that struggle, that through evil, dark times. Not necessarily staying in the Holocaust, though.
Mm-hmm. Were the three sisters just lucky?
Well, every survivor says they were lucky. Everyone. No. First thing they say, Lali used to say to anyone who asked him, how did you survive? He would say, I was lucky, lucky, lucky. Because luck had to play a significant part right from that minute you arrived in that evil place. The luck of stepping in front of a person wearing a white coat who flicked his hand to the left or the right. There was your first ounce of luck, because you had no way of knowing, and you had no way of arguing where you were being sent. Same with the girls, there was luck. But of course, with Lali and also with Sibby, more Sibby than Livy, because Livy was so young, you have to take that luck. And they both would admit to being what you would call an opportunist. They looked then for opportunities to keep that luck going for them. And where those, I think, who didn't have that mindset to be able to look out for themselves and others, they were the ones who possibly struggled to survive. But Sibby, you know, she kept Livy alive. She was the big sister.
Two of the sisters arrived in Auschwitz very early, in the spring of 1942. How it was possible for them to survive?
Look, we've looked at that, because not only with them, but you got to think Gita, she was same time, Silka, and I've met 2 or 3 other Slovakian survivors, all who were there from that March, April 42 to January 45. How did they survive? So we've looked into that quite a lot. Now, a couple of things were in their factor. They were the first. They were the first girls taken there. They were not taken there to be killed, but they were taken there to work. Mm-hmm. So from the very beginning, unless illness or any other reason could have got them killed, though, if they were able to just survive that first 6 to 12 months, the others coming in, they had to kind of fall into line with them. They now in some ways ran the camp. And there came a time in late 1943, I think it was, that one of the SS officers, one of the female SS officers, made an announcement or said, the girls with the low numbers, and by that she meant the ones who only had 4 numbers on their arm, they didn't have to go to selection every day. So they had, I think, the advantage of being there for so long, that they then were able to determine a pecking order, if that makes sense, in their blocks. Because everybody else was coming in and leaving, coming in and leaving. That's the only thing I can come up to. So other than the fact that they were able to just hold on to being able to find someone to help them when they need it. And they did, which included in a couple of instances, SS.
You wrote about 3 sisters. There is a 4th, isn't it?
There was a little girl. And here's one of the things about survivors and how much they tell their own children. When that had never been mentioned, that there had been this other little girl. And I was not able to go to Slovakia and go to their hometown and look at all the documents, the birth, the death, the marriage documents, which in the past I have done for Lali and for Silka because of COVID. So I had to send a friend of mine who lives in Slovakia to run off where the girls come from. I get permission from the authorities. Can we see all these documents? And they give me permission. So I sent this friend there who speaks English as well as Slovakian. And she contacted me the day she went to the office, the bureaucrat. And she was saying, okay, we've found Sibby, we've found Magda's entry, their birth entries. They then struggled to find Livy's for 2 reasons. Livy's date of birth, when she thought she was born, was a year out. She was actually a year older than she thought she was. But we finally found it. And when we found it, she had a different name. I got her on a WhatsApp video chat and I said, and her daughter was, and I said, hey, Livy, what's your name? And she said, Livy or Livia. And I said, do you have any other names? And she said, no, just Livia. And I said, well, if I said the name Esther to you, what would you say? And I heard her daughter who was there saying, who's Esther? And then Livy said, oh, that's me. That's really my name. And so her daughter's going, what do you mean that's your name? And she said, yeah, that's my actual name, isn't it? And I went, yes, honey, that's what's written in the birth register. And we left it at that, I thought. And then I went back to bed because it was the early hours of the morning for me. And then my friend Lenka rang me again and said, do you want to know about the 4th sister? I said, there is none. She said, yes, there is. She had just kept looking through the big journal that the names are written in. And she found a little girl called Amelia who was born 3 months after their father died. So their mum had been pregnant. And so that was a very difficult conversation. How do I bring up this little girl, this other child with Livy who had never mentioned it and no other family member had? So I did approach it very delicately with her daughter being present at the time. And she got upset and she shook her head and she said, of course. I said, it was our baby sister. And when her own daughter said to her, have you forgotten about her? And she got angry and she snapped at her, never, Magda and I say her name every day. She is our baby sister. She is not to be shared. Incredible.
It's amazing.
Yeah, but she died when she was 3 from tuberculosis.
Your novel also talk about the relation between fiction and historical truth. What is mean the truth in a work of fiction?
Yeah, well, with me, having my books being called fiction is because I like to write in conversations, dialogue. I want the people who I'm talking to, like Lali and Livy and Magda and their families, I hear the words they're saying in today's words, in today's language. My publishers told me that when I do that and I put conversations in, it's no longer a memoir, because how do you know for sure that's the exact words that were said? With regard to the stories, and I'm talking about all those dozens and hundreds of little stories, they are all true. They really happened to Lully, to the sisters, because they told me. I can't make that up. So none of the storylines are fictionalized. I've written them in a fictionalized sense. And that's what the difference is between, I think, fiction that you create and historical fiction, which I reimagine. And can I give you an example?
Yes, please.
Yeah, here's an example. All right, I've already told you, and we've already given away the spoiler, that the girl's father died. Well, when I was talking to Livy and Magda, and they told me about the conversation with their father, Livy was very young. She says she remembers it, but Magda says you can't. You're only 3 and you were being very annoying that day. But what she knows is that her 2 big sisters all her life have told her about the promise that she made, because she did say promise to her dad. Even at 3, she didn't know what she was saying. But when I asked them, what can you remember about the conversation with your father? And mostly direct that at Magda. And she said, I just know that we made the promise to Papa. And she said, and it wasn't until, he died the next day that, Sibby and I realized why he was having that conversation with us. I said, well, where were you? And she said, I can't remember. So I then asked them to describe their home to me. And they described a very humble home of a little kitchen with a table and chairs for everybody, 2 bedrooms. Only 1 bedroom really. And the girls shared that bedroom with their mother. And then Livy started giggling. And this is a woman well into her 90s now, okay? And she said, oh, remember, grandfather slept in the broom closet. I said, what do you mean the broom closet? And she said, well, it was so small, it should have been just a broom closet. And I said, okay, but what about outside? And that's when Magda said, Livy, remember the oleander tree outside? Every year it wanted to die and Mama wouldn't let it. I said, what do you mean by that? And she said, I just know every year that tree wanted to die and Mama wouldn't let it. And so she got it back to life. Well, really, I think what was going on was Mother Nature, that the tree was dying off in winter. But for that young girl, her mother was bringing that tree back to life every year. And then Livy said, and the gate on the fence in the back, it used to bang and it used to scare me at night. So the girls described to me their home. I have to write the vignette about their father and the promise to him. I now reimagine it in a setting because the girls can't remember. I put it outside in the garden.
How far can you speculate? How far can you go with your imagination in cases like this of Lale, of Cilkăi, of these three sisters?
Not very far. I couldn't imagine and write a book on my own if I tried. I do not have a creative brain. I could not just sit down and say, I'm going to tell a story. I've got to find something to spark me and to give me that base to start the story. So in terms of my imagination, I have to admit it is probably a little bit coloured by all the research I do, all the other testimonies, survivors that I've read or that I watch on videotape. And so I have a very broad now picture of what was going on. And so if the girls can't describe to me the exact setting in Birkenau when the young girl Marla was being surrounded and was about to be hung for having escaped. But Livy had such a prominent role in that young girl who was written up in history. They've written plays and symphonies about Marla, but Livy was there. She knows what happened. She took her dying body in a wheelbarrow. And when you look on Google, what happened to Marla, there are many other accounts. Oh, she was killed. She died in in the hospital, she made it here. But no, Livy knew what happened. But she couldn't describe the setting. I know what Birkenau looks like. I've been there. And so I can imagine that. I've been there to those horrible places. So my imagination, well, it's not my imagination, sadly. It comes from the facts.
The facts, yeah. The last one question. You have written about listening, about a very special listening, good listening, about the art of listening.
Yeah.
It takes a special kind of listening to understand and to pass on such stories, very harsh, very strong.
Absolutely. And the trick to that for me, Cristian, was when I am talking or listening to these people, I never write anything down. I never have a recorder with me. I am just focused on listening. There is no distraction in the room. No one's having to worry about, oh, I wonder what she's writing. Oh, maybe I don't want to say that if it's on a recorder. So if you actually, and that's what that other book was about, if you do just shut up and listen, you will hear. And again, that comes back to my 20 years of working in a hospital. You couldn't sit in front of somebody who had just suffered a tragic or traumatic event and take notes. Why would you do that? That's not listening. That's not empathizing. And I do this and people talk to me. People tell me these incredible stories because they know I'm listening to them.
Thank you very much, Heather Morris. It was a big joy and a great honor for me to have this dialogue. Thank you for it, and thank you for your amazing books. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.